The wind screamed across the frozen ridge like a living thing, clawing at the canvas walls of Fort Arland's supply tent. Inside, Private Elias Crow hunched over a flickering lantern, his frost-bitten fingers struggling to sketch the outline of a shelter they'd seen only once, months ago, through drifting snow. The Apache had called it a snow tent, but to Elias it looked like nothing more than a mound of packed ice and pine boughs. It could still hear the laughter of his fellow soldiers echoing in his ears, Captain Hargrove's booming guffaws, Sergeant Mills slapping his knee until tears froze on his cheeks. "Look at the savages playing house in the blizzard," Hargrove had roared. "We got wool and iron stoves, and they got, what? A pile of snow?" Elias hadn't laughed. Something in the old Apache woman's eyes, steady, ancient, unafraid, had lodged in his chest like a splinter. Her name was Nisoni, and she had built the shelter with her granddaughter in less than an hour while the patrol watched from their horses. The girl, no older than 12, had hummed a low song as she packed the snow, her breath pluming white in the sub-zero air. Elias had wanted to ask questions, but Hargrove had spurred his mount forward, scattering the moment like loose powder. Now, 3 days into the worst storm in a decade, the forked stoves had gone cold. The coal was buried under 6 feet of drift, the woodpile iced solid. Men coughed blood into their scarves. Frostbite blackened toes and noses. And Elias, the quiet cartographer from Virginia who had enlisted to escape a bankrupt farm, found himself staring at his crude sketch and wondering if pride was worth dying for. The hook came at dawn, when the tent flap ripped open and a figure stumbled in, collapsing in a heap of furs and ice. Nisoni. Her face was gaunt, her lips cracked, but her eyes burned with the same unyielding fire. Baying hair, the girl, her granddaughter, Atsila, clutched a bundle of pine boughs, her small hands raw and bleeding. "Water," Nisoni rasped in broken English. "For the child." The tent erupted. "Breathless coquette." Hargrove, his beard crusted with ice, leveled his Colt at the old woman's head. "Apache witch," he snarled. "You'll freeze with the rest of us before I let you." Elias stepped between them. His voice cracked, but he didn't back down. "She's not armed, Captain. Look at her. She's half dead." Hargrove's finger whitened on the trigger. For a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Then Atsila dropped the pine boughs and began to cry, not the wailing of a child, but a low, keening sound that cut through the men like a blade. Something shifted in the tent. Meese lowered his rifle. A young private from Ohio began to weep openly. Elias knelt beside Nisoni. "Your shelter," he said, tapping his sketch. "The snow tent. Will it save us?" Nisoni studied him, then the drawing. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Not save," she said. "Take." The first unexpected turn came when Hargrove, pride warring with survival, ordered the Apache women bound and guarded. But as the men watched Nisoni and Atsila work, packing snow into a dome, weaving pine boughs into a lattice, carving ventilation holes with a bone knife, something cracked open in the soldiers' chests. The structure rose like a white igloo, glowing faintly in the stormlight. Inside, the temperature climbed 10 degrees. 20. The men crowded at the entrance, breath fogging, afraid to hope. Elias was the first to enter. He expected cold, but instead found a pocket of warmth radiating from a tiny fire of pine resin and fat. Nisoni had shown Atsila how to bank the flames against the snow wall, creating a natural reflector. The Hill's song filled the space, soft and steady, like a heartbeat. One by one, the soldiers crawled in. Hargrove came last, his shoulders bowed. He said nothing, but when Nisoni offered him a strip of dried elk, he took it with trembling hands. The second turn was quieter, but it broke Elias wide open. That night, as the storm howled overhead, Atsila curled against her grandmother and whispered a story in Apache. Elias, pretending to sleep, listened as Nisoni translated in a murmur. Long ago, the people were caught in a great freeze. The animals hid, the rivers turned to stone. But Coyote, the trickster, taught the grandmothers to build snow houses. He said, "The cold is not your enemy. It is your blanket, if you know how to wear it." Elias thought of his own grandmother, dead these 5 years, who had taught him to read the land the way Nisoni read the snow. He thought of the farm lost to drought, the brother who died at Antietam, the letters home they never sent. When Atsila fell asleep, he crawled to Nisoni's side. "I laughed too," he confessed. Not out loud. But in my heart. I thought your way was less. Nisoni's eyes gleamed in the firelight. Less is more, when the world takes everything. The climax came on the fifth night, when the storm broke and the temperature plummeted to 40 below. The fort's last candle guttered out. Men began to slip into delirium, whispering names of sweethearts and mothers. Elias found Hargrove outside the snow tent, staring at the stars, his breath shallow. "Captain," Elias said. "We're out of time." Hargrove's voice was a rasp. "I sent scouts for help. 3 days ago they won't they make it back." Elias looked at the snow tent, now ringed by a second, larger dome the soldiers had built under Nisoni's guidance. 40 men crammed inside, sharing body heat, singing hymns in cracked voices. Atzila moved among them, pressing snowpacks to frostbitten limbs, her small hands steady as a surgeon's. "There is room for more," Elias said. "But we need to bring the wounded from the infirmary. They yelled out there." Hargrove's eyes filled. "I ordered those men left behind. Said they were expendable." The words hung between them like a noose. Then Hargrove did something Elias never expected. He knelt in the snow, pressed his forehead to the ground, and wept. Not the stoic tears of a soldier, but the raw, choking sobs of a man who had mistaken cruelty for strength. Elias helped him up. Together, they carried the first wounded man, a boy from Tennessee with gangrene in both feet, through the storm to the snow tent. Nisoni met them at the entrance. She didn't speak, only stepped aside. One by one, the expendables were brought in, the cook with pneumonia, the bugler who they lost 3 fingers, the lieutenant who they tried to shoot himself. The Apache women worked without rest, brewing pine needle tea, cauterizing wounds with heated stones. The transformative moment came just before dawn, when the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. Hargrove, his hands blistered from packing snow, stood before the assembled men. His voice shook, but he did not look away. "I was wrong," he said. "About everything. These women, they didn't just save our bodies. They saved our souls." It turned to Nisoni and Atzila, who stood side by side, their faces luminous in the firelight. Then, to the stunned silence of 40 hardened soldiers, Hargrove knelt again, this time not in despair, but in reverence. "Teach us," he said. "Not just to survive. To live." The snow tent became a school. Nisoni taught the men to read the wind the way sailors read the sea. Atzila showed them how to carve ice lenses to start fires with sunlight. Elias, once the quiet cartographer, became the bridge, translating, sketching, learning. It drew maps of Apache trails, of water sources hidden beneath snowfields, of migration routes the army had dismissed as myth. Weeks turned to months. The fort never reopened. Instead, a new settlement grew around the snow tents, first crude, then refined, with smoke holes and insulated floors. Soldiers who had once burned Apache villages now traded with them, bartering coffee for pemmican, wool blankets for moccasins lined with rabbit fur. Hargrove wrote to Washington, resigning his commission. His letter, smudged with pine pitch, ended with a single line: "We came to conquer a land." Instead, the land conquered us, and taught us mercy. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it brought a miracle. The snow tents melted into rivulets that fed a garden where corn and beans grew side by side, Apache seeds in army soil. Atzila, now 13, planted the first stalk with Elias at her side. Nisoni watched from the doorway of a new lodge, her hair threaded with silver, her eyes soft with something that might have been pride. On the last night before the regiment disbanded, the men gathered around a bonfire. Hargrove stood, his uniform replaced by buckskin, his face weathered but unlined by bitterness. "We laughed at their snow tents," he said, his voice carrying over the crackle of flames. "We thought we were superior because we had iron and gunpowder. But they had something greater. They had each other. And they chose to share it, even with their enemies." He looked at Nisoni, then at Elias, who held Atzila's hand. "This is what Ibe learned: survival is not the triumph of the strong over the weak. It is the triumph of the kind over the cruel. The snow didn't kill us. Our arrogance almost did. But love, Apache love, soldier love, human love, built a bridge across the ice." The fire popped, sending sparks into the starlit sky. Somewhere, a coyote howled, and Atzila laughed, the sound bright as breaking glass. Years later, travelers passing through the high plains would speak of a settlement called Nisonis Rest, where blue-coated veterans and Apache elders sat together mending nets, where children of both worlds learned to read the snow and the stars. And if you asked Elias Crow, now grey-bearded, his maps framed in the lodge he shared with Atsila and their 3 children, he would tell you the story of the snow tents. He would tell you how 40 men froze to death in their pride, only to be reborn in humility. How a grandmother and a girl taught an army that warmth is not measured in degrees, but in the space between one heart and another. And he would end with the words Nisoni spoke on the night the storm broke. The snow does not care who you were. It only asks who you choose to become. So choose kindness, traveler. Choose the hand extended across the drift. Choose the sun in the dark. For in the end, the coldest night cannot extinguish the fire of a single act of compassion, and that fire, once kindled, can melt the hardest heart.